So if you want to make this about predestination and individual salvation, you have to ignore Genesis 25:23. I'm sorry. That's just not what it's about. It's about two nations in the womb. That's the verse that's cited. So let's read this and then we'll continue. So Paul says, and not only this, but also when Rebekah, out of one act of either conception or one act of one man, Isaac our forefather, for before they were born or did not do anything good or evil, in order that the according to election plan of God might remain, some kind of wooden translation, not from works, but from the one calling things into existence. I've supplied that. I'll tell you why. It was said that the older will serve the younger, just as it is written, Jacob I loved, but Esau I hated. So there's a lot going on here, and he's going to continue to use the Old Testament to buttress, to support his argument that it's not about biology. And not only is it not about biology, but he's going to go even further. It's not about anything except for God's choice, what constitutes the seed. So we've got here now the example moving down a generation to Isaac and Rebekah, and then their kids, right? So before they're born, Jacob or Esau, before they were born or did anything good or evil, in order that according to election plan of God might remain. Now, election is a pretty contested term. It's a hot term. I take election, hopefully, in the sense of the Old Testament. That is, the elect people are the people who are chosen for a purpose. People chosen for a task, and that task is to bless the world. In you will all the nations of the world be blessed. That's God's purpose for Abraham and for his seed. So this is what he's doing with this seed, and he's going to create a people. He's going to create a system of worship, a system of law, or at least ways of looking at law, and then that's going to be a light to the nations. Their task is to be a light to the nations, to be priests to the nations. They're a nation of priests. They are elected to a task. And so to be in that group means you are now a part of this task. That's what Israel's going to be. But he's going to. It's God's choice. So it's his choice who constitutes that group. So before Jacob and Esau did anything evil or good, and not only that. So notice what he says, that he brings it back in verse 12 here to earlier debates in Romans, not from works. Now, I take works here to mean to be a shorthand for works of the law, and works of the law to be not so much like a perfect keeping of the law or something like that. That's not what I think Paul's talking about. He's talking about rather like legalism, in the sense of here is one or two or three things from, or however many, from the Mosaic law that these are what if you do these, you really are in Christ, in this Jewish movement, that you're actually a covenant person, a faithful covenant member of God's people. You are righteous in that sense. You are in good standing in the covenant with God. That's what he's getting at there. And so he's pushing back and saying that whether you do circumcision, whether you do Sabbath, food, laws, that stuff does not constitute you as Israel de jure from law. But just doing those things does not guarantee you a position as Israel. Israel has always been constituted by God's choice. God's choice. That's what we're establishing here. These verses all establish that God chooses sovereignly what people group he's working with, and what are the parameters of working with that people group. So they didn't do anything. But God called into existence the seed in the line of Jacob. And so let's get into this a little bit here. So I've just talked about how not yet being born. So again, primogeniture, not from works. We just talked about that. This idea of the one who calls. The Greek there is specifically ektu kalundos. And I think it's actually alluding back to Romans 4:17, when it says, just as it is written that the father of many nations I have placed you, before whom he believed God, the one bringing to life the dead, and calling kalundos, tameonda hos onda, that is calling the things not being as being. And I think he's actually referring back to that here. And so God calls into existence what he wants to call into existence. Is what's going on. I don't know. I don't think this is about calling individuals into or designating individuals as those within Christ. I think he's referring back to, again, Romans 4:17. So we have another citation here. This is in Romans 9:12. The older will serve the younger. That's from Genesis 25, verse 23. From the Septuagint version, it's actually equal to, it exactly matches the Septuagint version. And that reads, 2 nations are in your womb, and 2 peoples from birth shall be divided, and 1 people shall be stronger than the other, and the greater will serve the lesser, or the older will serve the younger, is another way you could put it. And this is before Jacob and Esau's birth, and it's God speaking a promise. So again, his choice, what constitutes the people. Notice, though, that the verse emphasizes it refers to 2 individuals, but it emphasizes nations. 2 nations are in your womb. And we're going to see that this is actually talking about people groups. It's not about God predestined Jacob to be saved and Esau to be damned. That's not what the text is talking about. That's not what the original context of 25:23 is. It says nations in your womb. He's talking about who is going to be the nation that has the people group through which the revelation and the promises, the seed, will be. That's the original context. So if you want to make this about predestination and individual salvation, you have to ignore Genesis 25:23. I'm sorry. That's just not what it's about. Or Paul doesn't care about the Old Testament. It's about 2 nations in the womb. That's the verse that's cited. So, you got to think about that. Again, if you go back to the Old Testament context, this is about nations and people groups broadly. Who constitutes the seed? This is another astounding choice in the narrative. Jacob is not the firstborn, and he didn't deserve to be the lineage of promise, the seed. Esau didn't deserve it either. They both kind of suck as people, to be honest. Jacob has a redemption arc, and Esau too, actually. Esau's awesome in the end, running and kissing Jacob. I love it. So Esau is not a bad guy. Esau's not damned necessarily. It's rather where are the people of promise coming through. And God actually puts up with Jacob's terrible way of stealing the birthright, but he uses that but even before that ever happens, he says it is going to be through Jacob, and it's through the means of his stealing the birthright. So this verse, the citation, I think it gives validation to God making what might seem to be an arbitrary choice to a Jewish law-keeping, an ethnic law-keeping Jew, or even a Judaizer in the first century. How are the promised people defined and selected? Paul's interlocutor, his opponent, imaginary, or he puts one in to the text later on in verses 14 and 19. That's going to be what they're arguing against. That God seemingly made arbitrary choices here. He's made an unfair choice. He's made a sovereign choice to define the people, reconstitute Israel as he sees fit, the seed as he sees fit. But Paul's saying he's been doing that from the start, not based on biology or works. God can choose how Israel is defined, period. Now, we need to be careful in applying Paul's logic, because just because God chose Jacob's line apart from anything he had done does not mean that the line does not have responsibilities to God. Again, it's God's sovereign choice how this people group works, who constitutes it, who's going to be in. Is it going to be ethnic Jews? Is it going to be more than that? And then the parameters itself are also up to him for what constitutes a faithful member of that body. So he'll limit that group to a remnant, right? He'll go from all of Israel, like early in the historical narratives of the Old Testament, and then it's going to be, no, northern tribes are gone. Now it's going to be, the locus of promises is going to be in the southern 2 tribes. And then that same threat of a remnant choosing, reconstituting what Israel is found throughout the Old Testament, right? Even in the story of Moses, which Paul's already alluded to, when Moses offers his life, that is in the context of God saying, I will turn you, one Israelite, into the people of God. So he can narrow it down to one if he wants. It's his choice, and then broaden it out again. And that's actually kind of what he's done, in a sense. Not like, I mean, at one point it was just Jesus as like the faithful Jew, and he really has reconstituted thing in one, and then branching it out again. That's beside the point here. So it's God's choice what he does. It's his own divine prerogative. We have another potential metalepsis here. So I'm just reading a quote here from Abbasiano from 2011. Paul appears typologically to assign unbelieving ethnic Israel to the place of Esau, which is what I've been saying about Ishmael as well, right? The elder descendant of Abraham with no natural right to the inheritance of the covenant household, who is sovereignly rejected as the heir of the covenant in favor of the younger descendant who had no natural right to it according to the ancient law of primogeniture. Just as Esau despised his birthright and inheritance, carelessly relinquishing it, so ethnic Israel has despised its inheritance in the Abrahamic promises, carelessly casting it aside by the rejection of Christ, who encompasses all of Israel's privileges and the promises made to her. So I'm not the only one seeing this kind of intertextuality and how the metaleptic appropriation of these verses for Paul's context. So you have to read behind the text as well. Who is Paul arguing with? What is the problem? This is not about individual salvation. This is about what constitutes Israel. There's another citation here in verse 13. Jacob I loved, but Esau I hated. Pretty close to the Septuagint version. Pretty close to the Septuagint version. And Paul's clearly citing that. The original context of that quote, actually, I think I might even have it for you, just because I want you to see it. Is it? Yeah, here we go. I've just given it to you here. I think it's important. So I'll give you the Greek and then the English there. The original context, well, let's read it together. I have loved you, says Yahweh, but you say, how have you loved us? It's talking about Jacob. Is Esau not Jacob's brother, declares Yahweh? I have loved Jacob, but Esau I have hated. So that's the citation. I have made his mountain ranges a desolation and given his inheritance to the jackals of the desert. If Edom says, we are shattered, but we will return and rebuild the ruins. Yahweh of hosts says this, they may build, but I will tear down, and they will be called a territory of wickedness, and the people with whom Yahweh is angry forever. Your eyes will see this, and you will say, Yahweh is great beyond the borders of Israel. Now you might say, it's clearly talking about them being damned or them being the unsaved people or something like that. That's not the context here. The context is about looking way down the line. So we go from before the Jacob and Esau are born, the earliest history really of Israel, all the way to the last prophet, right? Like canonical prophet. So he's spanning the history, and then the verse is supposed to tell you about what has happened over the last 1,000 years. What has happened? Well, Jacob, I have loved. I have stayed with Jacob with the seed promise. I have kept with them. I have been there. I have been their God. They have been my people. And Esau never was brought into that. Now you might think, hate. That sounds like God despises every single Edomite or something like that. No, this is treaty language. The original Hebrew context is treaty language. Love and hate is ancient Near Eastern treaty covenant language. It's technical terminology from ancient Near Eastern covenants. I just cited from Polig from 1988 there. So the point is that Malachi is defending against those who doubt God's faithfulness to his covenant and the fulfillment of his promises with regard to the covenant. So Israel is saying, like, you haven't been here for us. Like, look how we're doing now. But he's saying, no, I have been there the whole time. I have kept this relationship with you all the way through. And so God's saying, he's showing, like, I have what I chose, I stayed with, and that which I said constituted Israel. Again, loving and hating is not language of damnation, salvation. It's language of choosing according to covenantal terms. Jacob is the one that God has chosen to be this people, the seed people. Esau is not. Don't read overly emotive terms into this. That's just not how this is supposed to work. That's not the original Old Testament context. Again, the Old Testament context is what's going to help you here. And you should be prepping your mind, if you've been following along with what I'm saying, and going, wait a sec, is this another metaleptic inference that Esau is becoming what Israel is in his day. There's a comparison being made, a subtle comparison, his day as in Paul's day. So keep your mind there, because we're going to see more of that as we move forward. Edom at the time of Paul and in the Old Testament had really become kind of a personification of, actually I'm just going to cite to you from Hill and Patterson, 2008, became to personify the pride of a self-centered existence. They were allies of the Babylonians in the sack of Jerusalem. They moved into the Negev, after the southern area of Israel, after the area was wrested from Judah by the Babylonians. The Edomites also occupied Judean villages well into the Persian period. They did collapse at some point, but around time of Malachi's preaching, the Edomite kingdom was in ruins. By 312, the inscriptional evidence indicates that Nabatean Arabs had overrun the region of Edom, making Petra their capital city. Surviving Edomites either moved to Idumea or were absorbed by the Nabateans. So in other words, they're gone. Like, they're on their way out. God is not maintaining them as a people group, according to his divine promises. He's not working with them as the light to the nations. Edom is not under that kind of protection and covenant relationship. He hasn't chosen them for that. Jacob is chastened in their unbelief, and then they're restored. Edom is not. So it's God's proof to Malachi that he's maintained this relationship. And again, it's his choice to keep that despite all the years, the 1,000 years or so in between. No, I think we'll move on from there. I've already talked about how Edom was kind of representative of kind of negative feelings and stereotypes of kind of unrighteousness later on, and that does happen. And it really, the focus here is on the fact that Jacob, he maintained this covenant relationship with, and he didn't. The people stayed, whereas Esau, they ended up destroyed. There's more things I could say there. There's stuff in the book of Acts where it seems like Edom might be related to like Gentiles and to the nations, which are not going to be brought in. I won't get into all that right now. Okay, let's move to the next text, just because I am cognizant of time here. Okay, so we are moving to Romans 9:14 to 18. Let's read this text first. What then shall we say? So, okay, God chose Jacob apart from biology, apart from anything that they chose, their works. There's nothing they did. There's no law-keeping system. It is God's choice, his prerogative, just like he chose Abraham's seed and Isaac. Like, it's the same thing. Before even the Mosaic Law came about, which is an important point, because there are a lot of people who are arguing in Paul's day, you need the Mosaic Law. That's what constitutes Israel. No, it's before that. God has been doing these choices. So what shall we say? Is there unrighteousness on God's part? No way. For he says to Moses, I will have mercy on whomever I want to have mercy, and I will have compassion on whoever I want to have compassion. So then, it is not the one willing nor the one running, but of the mercy of God. For the scripture says to Pharaoh that for this very reason I have raised you up, so that I might show my power in you, and so that my name might be proclaimed in all the earth. So then, he has mercy on whomever he wills, and he hardens whomever he wills. Okay, so this is a really popular verse, but follow the argument. You cannot take this out of context. I have been meticulously, for 58 minutes, walking you through the Old Testament context. If you take these verses out of context, for sure, you can make this about whatever you want to make it about. Make it about a Calvinistic system, make it about predestination, but you are missing the point. You are not reading it in context. Okay? I'm being a bit harsh there, but I hear this cited out of context so often. Keep it in context.